Okay, this is going to be the third and final part of the series, and we're going to deviate a little bit from our 1e6, and we're going to take up White's perspective. So you said it was going to be an overlap in ideas, so why are we starting with 1d4? Well, if you start with e3, it gives Black the ability to force us into an exchange French. And yeah, just don't do it. You get so much more winning chances with the immediate d4, and it cuts down on having to know that theory from the other side. So in this video, we're going to take a look at quick and easy structural lines, which the ideas, the memory markers, the plans, are going to have overlap with the 1e6 versus everything course. So we're going to get a line for the Grunfeld, couple for the Dutch, the King's Indian, Benoni themes, the Slav, Queen's Gambit accepted, and Queen's Gambit declined. So let's get to it. Let's first start out with the Dutch. The Dutch has a linear structural relationship to our lines in the course. So we're going to go e3, and you can jump back to that last video. If you saw that, you know where the pieces go already. I'm placing a knight on c3, a bishop on d3, a knight on e2, and I'm playing f3. This is a fantastic structure against all three Dutch lines, the Leningrad, Classical, and Stonewall. Especially against the Stonewall because we have the ability with f3 to break in the center with e4 and a lot of variations. So say, for instance, if the Leningrad, we've got our structure. And as a side note, this scheme of development can also be used against the King's Indian, but I'll recommend a different line for flexibility. So after e6, knight c3, they've got the Stonewall structure, but again, same themes, very flexible. Notice how when you play games against, say, the Stonewall attack or Stonewall Dutch, a lot of the players just want to place a knight on e4 and then go for an all-out attack on the king's side. This line directly takes away their easiest scheme of development and typical play. Usually means it's going to force them to think, so very straightforward, good line, very practical. Not much to remember there. So now let's go to, say, the Benoni. We'll get the least popular stuff out of the way first. Well, old Benoni line with c5. I don't like the idea of playing e3 here because we can actually end up by transposition into the exchange variation of the Caro-Kann. Don't want to play an exchange French, don't want to play an exchange Caro, so I'm going to recommend d5 and gain the space because in the course we cover colors reverse Benoni ideas. So we can save on time by not playing c4 here. We've got the center. And this next move is a practical move because this bishop only has one potential square it can develop to. And as soon as knight f3 is played, they're typically going to play bishop g4. h3 is a good multi-purpose move. It takes away key squares from this bishop. And as our bishop comes to f4 in the future, it has the ability to drop back to h2. So multi-purpose. And after bishop g7, anytime we see a6, stop the expansion, play a4. And after castles, get the bishop developed. Finally, the Benoni break makes its way on the board. Takes. And we're going to go for typical development here. Bishop f4, hitting the Benoni pawn, followed by knight d2 and knight c4, where we have full harmony. That is a very, very common plan. We also see it in the course. The main focus is always bothering that Benoni pawn in the Benoni structure. Know this after writing the Benoni Simplified as well. You have to constantly be vigilant as Black, having to worry about the d6 pawn. So, okay, coming on back, what about King's Indian? I'll go from a different move order here. We'll go g6. And you do have that ability to play the knight c3, bishop d3, knight e2, f3 like we did against the Dutch. But if you already learned a line against the King's Indian attack, why can't we just use it against the King's Indian defense and be a tempo up? You absolutely can. And this is following a Title Tuesday game from 2023 between Grandmasters Shimanov and Andreikin, and the much lower rated GM uses these colors reverse ideas and gets a very easy position. So knight c3, knight f3, and it's a colors reverse position with an extra move for white. So let's gain space. And now we're getting to the key moves, the memory markers. Black wants to play for e4 and eventually get all the pieces around to do a kingside attack. We need to vacate this rook from f1. We want it on c1, and we want our bishop on f1. So we need to get everything in order first. Queen c2. Now everyone is piling up on e4, so queen e7. We've got one piece out of the way. Now we've got our second piece out of the way, best square for the bishop. Now why is the rook wanting to go to c1? Well, one, if we play knight d5 and they capture, our rook is going to exert pressure on the open file. Two, with our rook on c1, our queen can also come back, which is a key idea. So after bishop f5, queen d1, h5. We've got time, so we gain space. We do not want to allow this pawn to come here, so we play h3 ourselves. And black is fully loading up the sacrifice here. We see all the ideas come together, and after queen d7, a5, again following that aforementioned game. And I had a game very similar to this, colors reverse, which I recently covered on the channel. So if they were to sack the house, the point of the queen coming back is we are fully covered. And you can understand this is definitely not a position to worry about for white. So borrow those ideas that you're already using for black if you're having problems with some of these openings. So far we've covered the Dutch, Benoni, King's Indian, and Grunfeld from our, or not Grunfeld. Let's get to the Grunfeld. So knight f6, and again reiterating, if they get to a Benoni, we're again going d5, and this time we need to support with the c-pawn, but we're generally going to get the same themes, and I find it very interesting that even though we're having to waste a move with e4, the engine still thinks favorably in these positions, and when we don't have the typical plan with knight d2, knight c4, we're very often looking for the right moment to slam in the center, and you can play f4 to get everything lined up. So, now, Grunfeld. So you're recommending this passive variation against the Grunfeld? Absolutely, because this particular move order highlights a deficiency in the Grunfeld if black isn't paying attention. So what do you mean? Well, in the pure Grunfeld, we've got a knight on c3. And black is able to capture on c3, getting rid of that knight that's making a journey. With our move order, we have a bit of a trick here. There is no knight on c3. So we get the full center, and black's got to nurse this awkward Alekhine-esque knight the rest of the game. We've got easy development, though. a4, nice technical move. Maybe we can bother the knight even further. And to finish development, h3, following a game from 2021 between the boss, Magnus Carlsen, and Vakula Graf. Easy, clean development, not much to remember there. So now let's get to some of the common systems with d4, d5. Well, what if they do Queen's Gambit accepted? I'm going to recommend e3, solid. If e5, this is the only variation that we cannot prevent an isolated pawn. But thankfully, it's pretty effortless development. And in the other variation of the QGA, I like this line that was played by Nakamura against So in 2022. We take on c5, allowing the queen trade. a3, we're looking to play b4 to gain space. Knight bd2. And since black moved the bishop, no need to play b4, b3, bishop b2. With easy development and spaces for our rooks on the open file, I'd say even though it's a symmetrical pawn structure, white has just a teeny tiny advantage here as it's an endgame and our king's in the center already. So what about the Slav? c6. Move orders matter. If you play knight f3 or knight c3, you have to worry about the d takes c4 lines and black potentially trying to hold on to it. But if you go e3, if they capture, we have a superior version of the Queen's Gambit accepted, where we will eventually just play for the center to get our bishop out. So after knight f6, knight c3. If we move the bishop, we're going to find ourselves in theoretical lines of the Moran. So looking at this, and across all these lines, I wanted to make sure I'm providing something that the engine approves of. I like the move queen c2. If they capture, we're able to still capture in one go. If they don't capture, we go b3. Now, in the event they take the pawn, we're taking with the b pawn. A theme that we see in our London system lines, colors reversed. So after b6, castles. We've got clean and easy development. And the last move is important. Rook a to d1, x-raying, lining up, because we're looking to change the pawn structure in the center with e4, following a game from 2024 between Grandmasters Bach and Grishuk, where white went on to win. So last but certainly not least, what about the Queen's Gambit declined? Again, if dc4 will transpose back to Queen's Gambit accepted, and if knight f6, we're going to get that same theme that we saw against the Slav with our development. Bishop on the more aggressive square whenever possible. Okay, this is what I like to refer to as the rule of 4. We have the opportunity to change the pawn structure. How many different captures are correct? When you turn on the engine, it doesn't see a big difference in any of the captures. But I find it interesting that, say, Nakamura, when playing this position, follows the theme of give your opponent more opportunity to go wrong. C takes d5. Well, if you take with either piece, we have the potential to play e4 in the future. If they take with a pawn, in my opinion, the most accurate capture, they're still maintaining control over the center. But now d takes c5. You go, well, shouldn't he take with the knight to tempo your bishop? We can simply move the bishop, but then he's going to have to deal with an isolated pawn the rest of the game. After b takes c5, we're forcing our opponent to play a hanging pawn structure. And though it is very playable, it is not the easiest position to play, and it requires a lot of patience. Rook c1, and we're following that game with Nakamura from 2021. So in this quick video, I wanted to highlight some of the ideas, colors reverse, we can use from the 1e6 repertoire. And generally, you can play d4, and there's not a ton of theory that you have to know. Structural orientation, and yet engine still thinks, White's got that itty-bitty advantage across the variations. Thanks for joining in this series. If you appreciated this, check out the course on Chessable for more information. In the meantime, go ahead and like the video because it helps with the algorithm. And if you haven't subscribed, I'd sincerely appreciate it if you would. Thanks.